Well, hello, DCO Nation. Welcome back to another DCO Live. Guys, glad that you could make it. We got a bunch of guys on tonight. Steve, Russell, Small Craft Angler, Heath, glad to see you, buddy. Hope you're doing well. This is a conversation that has been in the works for, what, Katie Joe, almost about a month now. So I think... See, you had the flu when we first tried to get set up, and you're like, yeah, can we, and I was like, yeah, save your voice. You're good to go. But guys, we have Katie Joe, the Pluff Mud Princess, on tonight. She is fantastic. She is an avid fisherman, freshwater, saltwater. She's a fishing instructor, and she has hosted several seminars. So guys, now is the time. Get your questions in. Kind of what we're going to be talking about tonight is getting back to the basics. Katie and I, we were kind of chatting right before we got on tonight. And one of the reasons why I wanted to kind of broach this topic was going over YouTube and watching all these YouTube videos the last couple of weeks. It just seems like we just overcomplicate everything in the fishing world. I equate it to fishermen and golfers are the same. The golfers, they can take things down to a minute movement in their swing or the putting stroke. And it's like, really, just hit the ball. Okay, let's get back to basics tonight. So that's why I wanted to have Katie Joe on. So Katie Joe, thank you so much for coming on tonight. But one thing that I want to get into first of all is she is actually down in South Florida. So tell us about what's going on in South Florida and how the fishing's been down there.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you, Chris, for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm glad we got to meet at the Hadrill's Point event and glad we got our paths connected. So yeah, down in South Florida right now, I know it's a little bit warmer depending on where you're at. But yeah, no, we were just kind of chatting a little bit about just the variety of fishing down here. Not only do you have the freshwater with Lake Okeechobee, we've got the offshore. But something really kind of special, I guess, kind of as you get a little further south is just that exoticness in a way, where there's a lot of, peacock bass. We've got the clown knifefish, cichlids, Oscars, you can go right down to the Everglades. And I mean, it's just endless, the variety of species that you can catch. Even talking about just your neighborhood backyard pond, there's a lot of peacock bass and cichlids and things like that you can just go and, have your kid reel in that some guys, you had one of our guys you said was from Minnesota or something that would be like, how did you catch that? But, just really, really a special place that, I'm very lucky to have some friends and family down here to come and kind of visit. And, if you can get down this way, definitely somewhere you want to check out because it's very, very special for sure.
Yeah, one of the bucket list fish that I want to catch is the peacock bass. So how are you catching those? On her Instagram page, she shows some awesome pictures of some peacock bass that she has caught. So how are you catching those?
So live bait. So a lot of, people will throw some kind of top waters and things like that for them. But typically, if you're going to go out and kind of target those species, especially the peacock bass, live shiners is typically what you're going to buy. All the bait and tackles around here, they have the live shiners. Arkansas, I think, is like where they, ship them in from. But just even this little rig I have behind me that could be saltwater, or freshwater, is just small little hook, small little split shot leader line and just that shiner on there. And we've got a lot of, I say we, like I just, I'm working my way down here, but they've got a lot of the canals and, like we said, the backyard ponds and things like that. Typical, how you would maybe fish for largemouth bass or something like that, with the live bait, but same kind of thing just for the peacocks. They love that live bait. So, just simple is best, but definitely the live shiners is the way to go. A split shot, small hook, leader line, under those canals. They like the bridges, that provide that kind of shade when it gets hot and things like that.
Oh, okay.
But they're from the Amazon, that's kind of where they originate from. So definitely, the warmer it gets, they really get fired up versus, some of our largemouth say, it's a little too hot for me. I'm gonna go deeper, kind of, cool off. But those fish just get fired up the warmer it gets here. So like I said, really, really one of those special ones, especially if you can get some of those pictures I posted, the hump on their head. That's one of those big males. So you can really kind of tell the males from the females with those humps. So
okay.
definitely one you want to get down here and catch. They're fun too. I mean, very acrobatic.
Yeah, because that was going to be my next thing. Do they fight as hard as what everybody says?
Yeah, no, they're
Yeah.
very fun fighting fish. Especially, you were asking about the clown knife fish, which is another. I think in that photo series had posted there was a clown knife fish on there, so it's kind of they
Yes.
look it's kind of like an eel in a way. I mean, the best way to kind of describe them, but they've got those large kind of black spots on them. But the really crazy thing about them is not only do they fight and they jump out the water like a little tarpon, but they can actually swim backwards and sideways. So as you're reeling them in, that fish will start swimming backwards away from you instead of just typically fighting like a normal fish. Yeah. So definitely those that you're like, what is on my line kind of thing. And you pull out one of those, you're like, what? But just another one of those that, down, everything's a little crazy in Florida, but, we're east kind of thing, either through the illegal fish trades and things like that, or, irresponsible pet owners. But one of those things that, even you and I were talking about, it's kind of becoming more typical, but there's still a lot of kind of, how do they handle that, down here, especially with the native species.
Right. Yeah, that clown knife fish, that is a crazy looking fish. That is, again, I would love to catch one, but yeah, that is just a crazy looking fish. So
yeah, I'm serious.
Yeah. Everett jumped on. Howard, Anthony, great to see you guys in the chat. Again, guys, if you have questions, throw them in. I'm going to kick them off to Katie Jo because my throat's a little scratchy tonight. So let's keep her talking. You guys hear enough from me. But let's go ahead. Let's jump into the basics. So if you are just getting started into saltwater fishing, let's stick with the saltwater fishing scenario. How would you get started? Let's just start with rod and reel. What would you start with?
Yeah, so like I said, even, you had mentioned, a lot of people tend to kind of overcomplicate things, even if we have a lot of really great kind of local bait shops and tackle shops that will, steer you in the right direction. But it's sometimes you walk into that shop and they're like, you need to buy the new Stella with the gold pin. Like, it's just crazy, you don't really need to go spend a ton of money on your setup. As you get further into it and you acquire more gear, go for it. If you have the resources to do that, go for it. But really, obviously spinning gear is going to be your best bet. It's not that you can't use a bait caster. It's just you have a little more drag, a little more harder fighting fish with the saltwater fish, things like that. So typically, I like it. I tell people just starting off, I like a 7 foot medium fast for my rod. So 7 foot, medium fast. I mean, everybody here fishes there. And then as far as my reel, I typically go with a 2500, but a 3000 series reel is really going to kind of set you up for everything. If you hook into that larger redfish and, you want to have that, larger fighter, you need that little more kind of, drag with that. Or, hey, you want to go out and you want to throw artificials for trout one day and you need a little more sensitivity. You don't want to be so overpowered. That setup right there is going to kind of do everything you need. So I tell people 7 foot medium fast with a 3000 series reel. Pin makes a lot of really great combos that it's already got everything together there. I really, that's what I started out on, not necessarily recommending any brands, but, if you want something that, is affordable, you're going to be able to pick up and kind of go and know, that's a good way to go right there. You don't really need less is more. I say that a lot. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Matter of fact, one of my first setups I got from Bass Pro, and it was a combo, and it was a Pin Battle 3, I think a 2500 on like their 6.5 foot. I think it's their inshore saltwater series rod or something like that. And it only cost me like $120. And it was already spooled up with some line, and I went out and I started fishing. So, that's the way to go. Try to find one of those combos. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely recommend those.
Yeah. So, okay. So 2500 series, one of the mistakes that I usually see are guys using surf rods for inshore fishing, maybe like a 5,000 or an 8,000 size reel, something that is, way too big. And then, I'm going to say the rod is almost like a broomstick.
Oh yeah.
They can't cast it. They're not getting any casting distance. So, that 7 foot medium fast, like you were saying, is a perfect rod to start out with, because, the further away that you can stay from the fish, the better off you're going to be. You can't be right on top of a lot of these predatory fish. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
So okay, so let's work away from the reel. What type of line are you using?
Yeah, so line is definitely going to be important. We won't really necessarily, I'm sure a lot of guys here with the knots and things like that, your knots going to be very important as well, but definitely line type. A lot of people who come from the freshwater tend to like the monofilament and, try to kind of come into the saltwater with the monofilament. And it's not that it's not going to work and you're not going to catch fish with it, but you may find yourself breaking off and retying a lot more than if you would go with the braid. And like I said, freshwater, people use braid as well, but definitely recommend using braid if you're not using braid right now. Not only is it, going to give you a little more, with that monofilament, you got a lot more stretch with it. So with that braid, you're going to be fishing saltwater wise, a lot more oysters, structure, docks, things like that. So typically find people fishing with the monofilament. They get hung up on the oyster, they get hung up on the dock. They're sitting there fighting that monofilament instead of with that braid, you're going to kind of just break right off and kind of keep fishing. Also, kind of when you get into that braid, especially with the saltwater species, there's a lot more teeth. So same kind of thing. If you're fishing with that monofilament and you're catching trout and flounder, you go a little further and get some, those bigger fish that have a lot more sharper teeth, they're just going to kind of cut right through that monofilament. So I do typically find, 15 to 20 pounds, braid is typically what I like to use. I typically go with 20. But then, when you're talking about using the braid, also going back into kind of, hey, that braid is visible kind of thing. So, a lot of people, just throwing straight braid, I wouldn't, recommend, same kind of thing with the oysters and the docks and the structure, the teeth of the fish as well. That braid doesn't have a lot of resistance, abrasion resistance. So then you're getting into, well, I'm just popping straight off. I'm using the braid. I'm using straight braid. It's like, well, why are you using straight braid? So that's where, if you're going to, get into saltwater, obviously, using braid for the reasons we just talked about, but then utilizing that fluorocarbon as a leader as well. So typically, depending on what I have, the people will tell you this and this, but, typically 15-pound fluorocarbon, I'll pair with a 20-pound braid. If I have 20-pound fluorocarbon, I'll do 20-pound braids, like that 5-pound difference, depending on what I'm throwing, trying to catch fish that day, if they're eating kind of thing. But just that visibility, if they can see that braid, especially in Charleston, there's a lot of people fishing, what I mean? They see a lot of lures and baits and things like that all day long. So, having a lure out there, when you get especially into artificial, that looks just like a little bait fish swimming out there, or a little shrimp swimming out there, is going to be, a lot more beneficial than having that straight braid that they can kind of look at and be like, I don't know about that. Same thing with the structure. If you're fishing around the oysters, you're fishing around the docks, you're fishing, those fish that have those teeth, you're going to want to utilize that fluorocarbon. So you're not just breaking out all the time. It really does provide a lot of that kind of abrasion, if you get up on the oysters. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. You are definitely talking to somebody that knows how to catch a dock. Docks have cost me so much money, but I love fishing around the docks. But if you're not getting hung up, then you're not fishing where the fish are. So
absolutely.
I can catch a dock, you bet, and that's why I use a leader. So
yeah, definitely.
So speaking of leaders, so what are you using? What pound test? You said something about fluorocarbon. Do you ever use mono? What are you using for your leader? And how long is your leader?
So typically for leader, I like anywhere from 12 to 24 inches. Like I said, I'm not going to tell you I haven't fished with less kind of thing, but it's just one of those things, if you are fishing around those oysters and you have that fluorocarbon, you're going to get to a point where, hey, that leader does get free. So 15, 20-pound fluorocarbon. I typically like the fluorocarbon over the monofilament for kind of what we talked about. That monofilament has a lot more memory. So if you're still, and really, like I said, I know some guys have experience, but if you're still learning how to tie knots and, getting really the basics of fishing, that memory sometimes can get in the way, so where that fluorocarbon is a little more forgiving. Same thing, I don't like the stretch of the monofilament. I really do prefer the fluorocarbon over that. So typically I'm straight fluorocarbon. I'm not saying it's wrong to use monofilament. You could use monofilament as leader, but just when it comes down to it, kind of getting more into it, go ahead and buy the fluorocarbon kind of thing. So 15 to 20-pound fluorocarbon, depending on what you're fishing for. What was the other? said something else. I know we talked like, what was the other question about the leader?
Let's see, length, pound test, floor count. No, I think you covered it all. Yeah. So
And
these are the two. I've been doing some winter maintenance on my rods, which are right back here, and these are the two fluorocarbons that I'm using. So there's the 20-pound, and then I do use 12 during the winter time. I like to lighten up during the winter.
Downsizing in the winter.
So, but yeah, 12, 15, and 20. That's kind of what I use.
Perfect. Yeah, definitely. And then, like I said, as far as attaching, the leader, like I said, you'll hear me say it more than anything. Less is always more. So, when I was first starting off, I wasn't comfortable tying those line-to-line knots, connecting my braid to my fluorocarbon or monofilament, whatever I'm tying. So this is a little bigger than typically what I'd use, but, lighting, but like a very small swivel. This is even a little large, but, they make very, very small swivels that you can use to attach that leader to your braid. That way, less is more. It's not super bulky. It's not super flashy. And then, once you're a little more advanced, you feel comfortable tying it, double uni knot works really, really well. That was the one I tied for the longest time. Now I typically tie an FG knot, which some people say takes a little more time, but it's one of those things, if you're tying that leader on and you're going to be using it, you want a knot that you can trust kind of thing. So like I said, the way you attach that leader is also very important as well.
Right. Yeah. A lot of the questions that I do get is what knot do I use to attach leader to my braid? And I'm using an Albright knot. That's just the one that I feel comfortable doing. I can tie it in about a minute. Can basically tie it with my eyes closed. So, once you get comfortable doing those knots, like the FG knot, I could never tie it because you got to have it in your mouth and you got to have tension on it. And I look like some kind, I don't know, some kind of circus
it's like
clown.
I said, it's like anything. The more you practice it, the better you get. Because I have a friend of mine who ties, the Albright for everything. And like, I'll watch her tie it. I'm like, I don't know what you just did. She's like, it's simpler than the FG. I'm like, okay, you tell yourself that. I'm gonna stick with my FG knot. So
yeah, it's whatever you get comfortable doing. But exactly. I do like the idea of using the swivel, especially for people who are just getting into it and they're learning knots. Everybody knows how to tie the clinch knot. So just do a couple of clinch knots on that swivel, and you're good to go. You're in the water. You're fishing.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Like I said, it works well. You know what I mean? If it works and it catches fishes, it's not wrong. You know what I mean? Don't have people tell you otherwise.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there was the one story that I always use, and it's an old golf story.
So you're a golfer too now. You're admitting to it, Chris.
Well, yeah, I actually, my profession, I was a golf course superintendent for like 15, 18 years. So I was in golf for a long time and I played for a long time, but it's not the equipment, it's the golfer. It's not the equipment, it's the fisherman. So don't let anybody tell you. I used cheap clubs for a long time and I beat a lot of people on some cheap clubs. It's about your skills as the fisherman. Absolutely. And then it's just the equipment to help you haul the fish in. That's what it is.
And it's personal preference. If you enjoy something and it's working, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You know what I mean?
Right. Exactly. Okay. So we got 2,500 reel. We got a rod that's medium light, 7 foot, 15 to 20 pound braid, leader line, 24 inches, give or take, fluorocarbon.
Yep.
Live bait, artificials for a beginner.
If you're starting off, I definitely recommend live bait, especially, talking kind of more specifically to the low country. Like I said, everybody's, fishing saltwater, different areas, but same kind of thing, especially as we come into that kind of spring, come into that summertime, not everybody's necessarily comfortable with artificial rigging wise, what colors you use, etc. But, less is more. So, if you can use something that is not only looks natural, but is natural, is what those fish are feeding on, those mud minnows, that live shrimp, those live finger mullet, you're really going to kind of outweigh some of those people that are, maybe covering more ground with those artificial to find the fish that's maybe feeding and maybe it's going to, you're working it the right way and they're going to kind of take it versus if you can present that fish with something that they want, they're feeding on, especially, we'll maybe talk about lower tides and things like that. That would be the way to go. I definitely recommend using live bait at first and just growing your confidence. You know what I mean? Really learning the area. If you know, hey, these fish are going to be here at a certain time because they like the spot, we can talk a little more about the structure and stuff like that. Then, hey, work into the artificials and grow your confidence. But if you're just starting out, there's nothing wrong with live bait. And you'll have people that sit there and say, well, if you can't catch a fish on artificials, like, you know what? If it works, don't, why are you worried about me? So definitely, I like the live bait. You know what I mean? Especially if you just want to get out there and have a fun day and catch some fish. There's nothing wrong with live bait. I definitely recommend going that way, starting off.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, without a doubt. Now, you mentioned several. Shrimp, mud minnows. Do you have a preference between the two, or does it really matter? Mullet. I mean, there's all kinds of. There's fiddler crab. I mean, do you have?
Yeah.
I mean,
you
can walk into a bait shop and get lost amongst the live bait. So
yeah, and that's one very lucky thing about being in the low country. We do have a lot of live bait options. Especially coming down here to South Florida. It's not that they don't have live bait options, but it's just a little more limited. You'll see a lot more frozen options kind of thing. So, we are very lucky to not only have those options in the tackle shop, but being able to go out and set a mud minnow trap, throw a cast net. Blue crab's another great one that we have, almost year round. So, having those options in our creeks that we can go obtain and then present it to those fish and catch those fish, I think that really is going to outweigh anything. But another kind of point, especially getting into the summertime, not only do you have a lot of people out there fishing, but those live bait options are in the creeks, you know what I mean? So, there's been times out there where, all I have is live mud minnows because that's, just what I picked up or that's what I caught that day. And I know the redfish are there and I know they're feeding. But if I present a live mud minnow to them, they look at me like I've lost my mind. You know what I mean? Because they really will get tuned in to, hey, we're eating live shrimp this day. Hey, we're eating, live mud finger mullet this day. And so typically I tell people, if you have live shrimp and you can get live shrimp and you are fishing in an area that, like we talked about, hey, that fourth dock on the right that Bobby told me about, he said there's redfish there. He was just catching them this morning. And you go and present that live shrimp there or, whatever spot you're trying kind of thing, and they're not biting. A lot of people will sit there and kind of try to hit it hard. And it's like, those fish just may not be there. I feel like, especially in the summertime, a live shrimp is about as good as you get. I've had them go between a finger mullet and a mud minnow. They'll sometimes pick that finger mullet, over that mud minnow because, mud minnow is like the lesser of the two. But one of those things, if you're fishing in an area, you've got live shrimp and those fish aren't biting, you're not catching anything, move spots. Just move spots. The fish may just not be there. So definitely, live shrimp is one of those ones you can get more year round. So definitely, I like a live shrimp for sure.
Yeah. And everything eats a shrimp. Everything eats a shrimp. So you really can't beat it. And, that was a really good tip. And I don't really want to pass over this very quickly is changing up your bait before you leave a spot. They may not be keyed in on, some kind of a minnow or a small bait fish, and maybe they do want the shrimp. There was a time where I was fishing a creek mouth and I was throwing a paddle tail and I just wasn't getting a hit. And I'm like, there's got to be something here. It was a falling tide. I was seeing the bait come out of this creek. So I flipped a shrimp up there and bam, picked up like a 16 or 17 inch flounder. And I'm like, okay, so before you leave a spot, change it up, just don't leave because, they're not hitting shrimp. Well, change it up, throw something else.
And presentation is a lot too. Like a lot of people, some people are like, well, I don't have anything else. All I brought is live shrimp today. A lot of times, especially as you kind of get into saltwater and you figure out a little more, but, or even the freshwater. I mean, those fish are kind of tuned into the eyes of that bait. You know what I mean? So in Charleston, we have a lot of people fishing and hitting it hard. And so if you, are fishing a Carolina rig, and we can talk about that a little more if you're not familiar, but, you're fishing that Carolina rig and you've got that mud minnow or that finger mullet or that shrimp rig through the head, and they just might be a little weird. And they look at that shrimp and say, I don't know, Bobby, something's off with that shrimp. And I just don't know why. And they're not hitting it. Hook it in the tail, hook it back by the, back of the shrimp. And then, you're presenting it in kind of a different manner. So when those fish look at it, they go, oh, it looks good to me. And, sometimes just changing that presentation of how you're rigging that bait on there, I definitely had make a difference for me some days. So like you said, trying a few different ways, presenting it a different way could definitely make a difference before you say, oh, there's no fish here kind of thing.
Yeah.
So especially when, Bobby tells you, hey, he was catching them there that morning, they might just be a little picky.
Right, exactly. No, that's awesome tip. Awesome tip. Guys, I know you are not this shy. Get your questions in. You guys
I'm
usually
taking
beat
it all
me
in.
up. Yeah, so get your questions in. I'll flash them up there and we'll get them answered for you. But let's move into one of the questions again that I get all of the time is tide. What tide should I be fishing? Incoming, outgoing, high tide, low tide. So, kind of break it down. Give me your ideas on the tides around here.
Yeah, definitely. So, like I said, if you're not familiar with the tides, we do have 4 tides a day. So, we have a high tide, high tide, low tide. So, depending on who you talk to, some people say, I love a high tide or I love a low tide. But, like I said, there's a lot of opportunity, especially being in the low country, Charleston, Savannah, surrounding kind of areas to where not only do we have the tides, but we have very large tidal swings. So, especially the other weekend when I got stuck in the solo skiff, and I say stuck in the solo skip, you're like, how do you get stuck in a 14-foot boat, follow moon patterns are another thing. So the tides are controlled by the moon kind of thing. So, we had, I think the high tide that day was, I want to say it was like a 7.8, that was your dead high tide. And then our, dead low tide that day was almost a foot below. So a negative foot below, what it would be like a negative 1.0. And you're like, how do you have 8 feet of water moving out of a creek? That's a lot of water. That's a lot of, movement of that water. And so typically I tell people 2 to 3 hours before low tide, 2 to 3 hours after low tide. I kind of compare it to kind of like the Ryan's buffet at high tide. At high tide, there's a lot of water, especially in the summertime. That bait's moving all around. Those fish have a lot of opportunity to move around. So it's like you're at the Ryan's buffet, and you got filet mignon, and you got pizza, and you got the ice cream machine, and you're like, I don't know where to start. There's so much to take in. You know what I mean? Versus at low tide, I say it's kind of like, the McDonald's in the bad part of town, to where it's like, ice cream machine's down. They're out of chicken fingers. Like, you got French fries, maybe, you know what I mean? So there's not as much water for those fish to move around in, so they are kind of secluded to certain areas. That same with the bait. That bait is more secluded to certain areas, or maybe they can't get to the bait they want to be in. So typically 2 to 3 hours before low tide, that tide's moving out. Those fish are thinking, okay, water's moving out. I need to eat. I need to feed. Same kind of thing. As that water starts to move back in, those fish go, all right, it's about to be prime time. The Ryan's buffet is about to open again. I'm hungry. So a great time to go out and kind of, not only catch those fish, but like we talked a little bit about, Chris, earlier, when you have such a beautiful, area like the low country, where if you are starting out in the saltwater, you look out there, you go, well, everything looks good. I want to fish it all. But like we talked about, if you're going out there and you just happen to stumble upon, a certain piece of strip of grass at a certain time, the tide's falling or it's coming in, and you're just catching redfish after redfish after redfish after redfish, and you're like, why am I catching them there? Low tide is a great time to go out there and say, oh, well, there's a huge oyster bed here, or, oh, there's a down tree here. Those fish are hanging out on that structure, because not only is that providing protection for them, but it's providing protection for that bait. That bait is hanging out around those areas. So like I said, low tide provides a lot of opportunity to really kind of go and, figure out your landscape, but also kind of, target those fish, because they are a little hungrier. They don't have as much opportunity.
Yep. Absolutely. So we did have a question from Carrie. Mr. Brownie.
I'm glad he's here. He's the man.
So Carrie,
both of
them. Carrie said, you have $200 to spend on a rod and reel. What amount of money will you spend on the rod?
Where are we shopping at, Carrie? These are important questions. Are we just picking up a rod from the thrift store and taking the $175 somewhere else? Like I said, there's a lot of people that place, like we talked about, a lot of value on, the types of rods they're buying and the types of reels they're buying. And it's not to say that, they aren't incredible and they aren't amazing products, and, they have the gear ratios and they have, this and this and that is going to, last you a long time, which if you're in it for a long time, you want something that is going to last, kind of thing. But I'm not one of those people that wants to go spend, $200, $300, $400 on a rod, or, same kind of thing in comparison to a reel. If I got $200 and I'm walking into a tackle shop, I might like we talked about, buy a combo that is $120 and then, you know, spend that rest of that $80 on tackle and gear and leader and things that I can use that are going to last me a long time. So it doesn't really answer the question, but like I said, you don't have to place a lot of importance on spending a lot of money on the rod or the reel. Like I said, find something that it's going to work for you. Like you talked about with the huge surf rods, it just makes me think of, you know, this kids summer camp I did, you know, for the few summers, because, you know, the kids would walk in and their parents would have them all set up, but they would have like 11-foot rods, surf rods, and I'm like, yeah, buddy, we're not probably going to use that today. You know what I mean? Here's a little spinning rod. This is what you got today. You know what I mean? But yeah, like I said, find something that works for you. Find something that's going to do what you want. Whether, you know, hey, I want to do a little heavier inshore and catch that bigger redfish, or hey, I want some more sensitivity for the trout fishing and things like that. That I go like you talked about. I go versatile. If I want to use my rod in freshwater and catch a bass one day, and then I want to take it the next day and go catch a redfish, something that's going to be able to do both of that for me. So. Great question, Gary.
Yeah. I'm, you know, if I had $200 rod and reel combo, I would definitely spend the majority of it on the rod. The rod is going to give you, you know, the sensitivity, help you fight the fish. Really, the only thing the reel is doing is picking up line and applying drag. Your rod does everything. So, you know, however you want to divide up that money, I usually spend more on the rod and less on the reel. So that's just my opinion. Take it for what it's worth. You know, this is a free podcast, so that's probably what the advice is.
And a lot of them are interchangeable. You know what I mean? If you buy a nice rod, you know, you can always buy a nicer reel down, and vice versa. You know what I mean? So just one of those things to kind of think about.
Yep. And then United by Water, he jumped in and he said, I'm kind of spoiled. Mosquito Lagoon, Indian River, Banana River don't have tides. Yeah. So what I understand is it's like very minimal tide movement down there.
Even, we're, like you said, that's Indian River right up from kind of where I'm at here. And you know, I'm like southeast. What part are we at? Down here near Stewart is where, you know, I'm at right now. So same kind of thing. I mean, like even we went out the other day, you know, obviously they have a lot of the mangroves and a lot of, you know, the oysters kind of built up on the mangroves and kind of the tunnels and things like that. But I mean, their difference between high tide and low tide is like a foot and a half most days. And like, that's big for them. And I'm like, brother, we're moving like 8 foot of water every 6 hours. Like it just couldn't even compare. So it's like I said, it's in a way, if you're in the low country and you're able to, or even get down there and fish and experience that kind of thing, it really sets you up for when you go to these other places, because you just have that greater appreciation of, well, I'm fishing, you know, in 8 foot of water versus, you know, 6 hours later, I'm fishing in nothing, you know, I'm just sitting on mud kind of thing. So it's very cool. Yeah. So the lunar effect does have that tide. So where you're positioned geographically, you know, you will have that kind of greater pull of the tides and things like that. So we were just very lucky in the low country to be very strongly affected by that.
Yeah, we are very
lucky. Some would say not.
Yeah. As a kayak fisherman, those days that we have an 8 foot tide swing, that is not fun. I am looking for protected water. You do not want to get in that current. And been there, done that, fought the current trying to get back to landings, and it is awful. Absolutely awful.
Plan your trip accordingly, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I usually try to keep this at about 30 minutes. We are actually at 35 minutes.
I didn't even realize we're talking that.
Yeah, I know. It goes by really quick. So guys, I'm going to give you another minute or two. If you've got a question, throw it in there real quick. But Katie Jo, really appreciate you jumping on. Just a wealth of information. You know, getting back to basics is something that I need to always kind of remind myself when I'm out on the water, because when I'm fishing, all of a sudden I get all of these thoughts in my head. And then after a while, it's just like, what are you doing? Just throw the lure over by the oyster. There's got to be something there, because that's where the bait fish are hanging out. You know, Don't overcomplicate it.
Less is more. Absolutely. Always.
Yep, absolutely. So guys, again, I really appreciate you. We will do this again next week. And Katie Jo, I will definitely have you back on if you want to come back on.
Yeah.
So, you know, maybe like at the turn of the seasons, maybe like in the spring, summer, have you on, 3-4 times a year, and kind of get your input and opinions on, the certain seasons that we have down here. But
absolutely.
Thank you so much. Don't go anywhere when I end the live stream. We'll chat for a minute. But guys, I will see you all next week, right here at the same bat time, same bat channel. And again, appreciate everybody. I will see you out on the water. You guys have a great night.
Thanks for coming, guys. Thanks for being here. Thanks so much, Chris.
Thank you.